at all, so white just has some sort of clear advantage. Yeah, and one reason why bishop f4 is a good plan in this sort of position is because the rook on a8 has no use of the b8 square, and also the bishop is quite awkward just sitting there on b7. So the main line is is bishop e7, and okay, it's also possible to play the same bishop f4 plan, although I don't think it's as effective here. The main line is just e5. So e5, knight d7, queen g4, hitting the g7 pawn. And now one of the sidelines is king f8. And if king f8, it might just be simplest to play bishop d2 and then try to play knight a4. So for example, if you play knight c5, you can just play knight a4. And you don't have to be afraid about losing the two bishops, because then you can just play rook ac1. And I mean, if you taking here and taking here, oops, and just play rook ac1, and white has excellent play. So h5, queen d4, take, c5, and now you can just play b3. And basically, here you can just move the queen over and then centralize your rooks and play c4 ideally. So once white plays c4, the position should just be slightly better for him. Although it's nothing serious, again, black is a sort of position where he doesn't have any sort of real counterplay. So I'll go back to the main line with g6, and now knight a4. And there are a bunch of moves that have been played here. h5 has been played here, queen a5, c5 has been played here, and rook b8. But first I'll look at h5, which I think might be the weakest. Queen f4, as recently played by Kurnasov. Now knight b6, and b3 looks like a reasonable move, but let's just look at bishop d2. Take, bishop d7, and now just c4, queen b6, and now queen c2. And I think white just has a slight advantage in this position. And the next line, I'll briefly look at c5. This line was recently played by Mamedyarov, although he lost the game, and I think that he generally is abandoning this opening. c4, which is the correct reaction in general to c5, because I mean, in any sort of position, if he pushes d4 and gets this structure, it can instantly collapse by an appropriately timed b4. So let's see, c4, queen a5, and now the best move is queen d1. And in the game, d takes c4 was played, and bishop e4, it looks quite strong and was played in the game. And bishop h6, and this was played in Bakro Mamedyarov. But also bishop takes c4 is a clear advantage. And in this position, if you play bishop e7, you can just simply take on d5 and play bishop h6. Yeah, also with a pretty comfortable advantage. This is a pretty sloppy pawn structure, and there are nice squares for white to use, like the c4 square. So anyways, I'll go back, and queen a5 is one of the main moves. Bishop h6, and the endgame, I think theory considers this endgame after queen b4, hitting the a4 knight and the queen, so that trading is obviously forced. I believe that this endgame is just considered to be better for white, slightly better, of course. And bishop f8 is one line, take, c4, take, and rook ac1. And this was played in a Carlsen game against Vescovi. And I'll just go back, I won't mention it much. But after bishop a5, in the main line, white just gained some space, b4 and f4. and a5 has been played a few times, I think by Wrublewski, and b5 was played in 2 or 3 games against Wrublewski at least. But there's one interesting novelty is just to play a3 here, and it's difficult to find a useful move for black because if he takes on b4, then white will dominate the a file. So it is a little bit difficult for him to decide what to do. And so if knight b6, now you can just play knight c5, and if you try to chase the knight away with knight d7, then white plays knight b3, and again he has a clear advantage. So I think that going to this endgame is something white should be happy about. And so the main line I consider here to be c5, and b3 has been played here before and is considered the main line. I think b3, c4, bishop f1 is considered the main line, but I think it's interesting to play c3 here, and in this line the bishop can go back to c2, but at the same time white also has some pretty active ideas. So let's look at one move, knight b6, which is considered dubious. If you take, play b3. In this position, by playing bishop g7 and bishop f6, white is able to get an extremely strong attacking position. So I'll just go through a few moves. Bishop g7, rook g8, take, and rook a d1. And the king is in basically a horrible position. And after a few natural moves, white's practically winning here. But even here, I guess if you were to look at it from a computer's perspective, it would be considered a huge advantage for white. So let me go back to bishop b7. Now there's a very interesting way to play the position with b3 and countering the basic plan of bishop c6 by the strong move c4. And the main idea here is that if you take on a4, which is the move I would most expect, you don't have to retake the bishop. You can just take on d5, so that if you move the bishop to b5, now you simply take on e6, take, and the intermediate move bishop e4, attacking the a8 rook, and then on the next move you can take the pawn on e6, and the attack is worth much more than the piece, which you also have 2 pawns for the piece, so it's definitely more than enough. So it's a very interesting idea to play c3 here, and I think white has some advantage here. And yeah, it's just interesting to consider the b3 c4 idea directly, because the bishop goes back to c2 and has a slightly more active role here. So anyways, the only other line that I've really looked at here was, instead of queen a5 or h5 or c5, is the line with rook b8. So rook b8, and now I've just analyzed b3, h5, and now queen e2, and there were some games played with knight b6. And this is probably the best line that black has in this whole opening. There are a couple games, but I think that it's a novelty actually to play the simple move bishop e3 here. And I think that white's next main idea here, is just simple play on the dark squares by playing bishop g5. So I play bishop e3, and if you play queen c7, then queen d2, to be followed by bishop g5. And here, if c5, again you play queen d2, and in the resulting position with the idea of bishop g5, I also think that